Hey everyone, welcome into episode 7 of this interactive Planet Coaster tutorial. And as I mentioned at the end of episode 6, we are going to be joined by Mike Sheets to talk about landscaping and specifically talk about Neature. So, hey Mike, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good.
I gotta say, I love this series. This is awesome.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, hopefully it's something that's helpful and, if people kind of quit the game because of its learning curve in the past, hopefully, they use this to kind of pick it back up again. So yeah. So thanks for creating this little scene on camera here.
A little Neature scene. Yeah,
it looks amazing. So it's something, landscaping is something that I struggle with in the game. My temptation is always just to, and I do, we'll get into some of these topics over here to the right of how Mike's going to walk us through how to create a scene like this. And I implement some of them, but my temptation is always just to kind of keep repeating the same thing over and over again, and use the same pieces over and over again. So this is, I feel like where you excel is you treat the scenery, the landscaping pieces that are available in the game the same way that a lot of people treat just the regular building pieces, finding really versatile ways to use them. So hopefully people can pick up a trick or two in the process, but I'll let you kind of walk us through here.
Cool. Well, the definition of Neature is, how did I define it? It's like nature, but it is in a more kind of aesthetic way. In the context of a theme park, you're going to have areas that aren't necessarily landscaped or like really designed, but they are still part of the larger theme park. The majority of your landscaping is probably going to be what I consider Neature, where they have kind of cleaned up what is already existing, but they're not actually putting effort towards like a landscape.
Right, like someone's not going to come in and prune bushes or trees or anything like that. The
only time that they would really prune anything is if like the park is in a high wind area, or if the tree is in an area that could harm a guest or something like that. Otherwise,
so it would be purely functional. It would not be or safety reasons. It wouldn't be for beautification or anything.
Not usually.
Like
not if you don't have the budget for it.
Right. Okay. So that's, just looking at the variety in here, and one thing that I always am blown away by, and just the time I've spent in No Name Landia, is the sheer variety you've gotten out of the limited foliage that we have in the game. So
you make lemonade out of the lemons that we have. At least
yes,
you try.
The scenery is very, very lacking in the game. Hopefully we get some more landscaping tools in the future, but you definitely make the most of them. So that's why I wanted to have you on, and hopefully people can pick up a couple of tricks.
Cool. All right, here we are in step 1. So before you actually lay any plants down, this is the most important step. It's actually probably a little backwards, because when you create height, it actually takes away your terrain paint, but that's okay. We'll start with step 1. You varying your terrain paints and stuff like that is incredibly important, because your kind of canvas that you're using is important, that you've got the same kind of variety that you're putting in like your structures and that you're putting in your rides. The ground, if you just step outside and look down, it's not all going to be the same color. It's not going to be all the same material. So by using the 8 kind of palettes that you get, you can create a pretty cool mix, and your ground becomes just as interesting as everything else that you're doing.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I, prior to, again, No Name Landia, like that wasn't even on my radar, and it does make a huge difference. Even if all you do is one, like that already makes a huge difference. But then when you start to sort of layer them like you did here, it gets even better. So.
And when you start layering things like that, like you might have grass popping through, and you're like, okay, I'm going to put a bush there. It almost like directs you how to place plants down once you actually have your terrain painted out.
Yeah, and I kind of mentioned this in one of the earlier tutorial episodes, but what's your kind of range in this area for intensity and size that you typically work with?
So I typically keep it a little bigger when I'm doing the blends. So I paint like that mulch texture very, very opaquely. And then I take the intensity way down to like maybe 10%. I bring the size up, and then I just do like light clicks until it looks the way I want.
Yeah, and that really, I mean, it's almost like painting, right? I mean, you're kind of blending things together and feathering them together.
Exactly, because you can create, I mean, that mulch is one brown, but if you mix it with that rock texture or that leaf texture, then you have all kinds of different colors that are coming through.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, after, seeing stuff like this, it gives you kind of a new appreciation for, how good the terrain textures are, actually.
Yeah.
They're really good in the game. Yeah.
All right.
So step 2.
Step 2. This is really important. I think we talked about it in the BroBasics with Neature. Creating height is super important if you are designing your park at like peep level, because what it will allow you to do, especially when you have a large planter, is it blocks your view so that you only see the planter and you don't see anything behind it. So you're creating depth in that way.
Yeah, so if you look at, get a peep size in there and raise up the ground, you can, like, to your point, you can see how now you're blocking things off that maybe you don't want people to see.
When you start doing it large scale, you'll see a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah, so generally, I mean, this is probably pretty self-explanatory, build it up. Do you smooth these things at all, or do you, is that really, okay. So you'll
bring it up, then smooth it down, and then, bring it up. Really vary your intensities, vary your size, because you can get really smooth results if you do that.
Yeah, and so I'm assuming the reason for the smooth on something like this is because some of this would be somewhat loose soil. And it would have been impacted by rain and erosion and things like that. So
exactly, yeah. Especially if you've got nicely mulched beds, you're going to have a mound like that.
Right. Yeah. So for time's sake, I'm not going to do the painting, but you would just do the exact same thing we just did over there on top of this mound.
And you can actually use I think it's the sampled brush thing when you're doing the terrain manipulation.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, you selected. Or
I think
sampled.
It's sampled, yeah. So it actually, it keeps what you've been, what you put down already.
Interesting. I did not. Wait. So I didn't know about this. So do I come over here and collect it?
No. So go to the first one and just raise it and see what happens, without actually changing any of the terrain.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, I get what you're saying. So use sampled, and it's just gonna take what I already have.
It takes whatever's underneath, yeah.
Okay.
So you might have to redo your blends, which is probably why you should do 2 first and then 1.
Right, okay. That makes sense. Okay, well, there you go. I learned something already.
Yay!
All right.
So now that you've created height, the more important thing when you're starting to lay down plants is creating depth. And this is where it can get a little tricky. Some people like to copy pasta forest, is what I like to call it.
Yeah.
Where you basically have the same thing over and over and over again. What I try to do is I try to think of what these plants kind of need, and they need sunlight, they need air, and so they need to have a bit of space. And it actually creates better design too.
Yeah. Yeah, I like this. So can you explain a little bit more when, and how you design something relative to the path? Like, I mean, what do you typically see in Neature, in terms of how close trees are to paths? I mean, I would assume that they would keep those pretty trimmed.
Yeah, so for this example, I have the tree in the back because it's the tallest thing, but you could have trees all the way to the path as long as there's a nice bit of openness and it's not like really, really clustered.
Right, because there's, most trees, they kind of avoid one another, right, as they grow.
Yeah.
And so you want to leave space in between.
The scientific thing that I kind of go by is that trees are factories of sunlight, and what they are going to do, it makes no sense for them to compete with one another unless they are forced to.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And then station 4 here.
Vary material. This is another important one. So now that you've created some depth, now when you pick out your material, you should also include things that you might not normally do, like dead twigs, dead trees. And you can also use flowers to your advantage. If you don't necessarily want the color, you can paint them the same kind of green that their leaves are, and they act as a kind of a different plant.
Yeah, so this is just one of the flowers in the game, right? That you colored differently. And then what did you use for this here? The dead plant.
So that is
so
a tree on its side
that you stuck into the ground. Okay.
And we'll go over that in the next step. But it's important to have that dead material, because in Neature, they're going to clean up what the peep can see, but there's an area beyond it that they're just not going to spend a whole lot of time trimming out and stuff like that. So having those dead sticks in there actually makes it look more realistic.
Okay, yeah. No, that's fantastic. It adds a ton of realism, just that little touch. So that's good. So next station?
Next station, sink and rotate. This is probably, I know they're all important, but they are actually all important. The best way to get the most out of these pieces that we're given, because we don't have a whole lot of them, is to sink your trees, rotate them, sink your bushes, invert your bushes. There's a whole like treasure trove here of things that you can do.
Yeah, and if you've got that tree sunk down below, and what I think's interesting is if you actually dip below ground here, you can see just how much you've actually sunk things into the ground. I mean, it's pretty substantial, and I've already talked about scale a little bit in this series, and I've got a whole episode kind of devoted to design topics, but that's obviously one that I think is common. The scale is intentionally exaggerated in the game, and sometimes that can work to your advantage. Like you've got the different heights here. So you've got full height, half height, quarter height. Now, sometimes you might want the full height of the bush to hide something or, direct sight lines. But then, if you want, a nice sight line that opens up into the horizon, you might want to sink it down even further like this.
Yeah, and it's almost counterintuitive to leave space open like that, but it is so much better for your design, and it actually makes your parks look a lot more deep. Like there's a lot more depth to them. Yeah, well, and as I was saying, like your ability to get the most variety out of what we have. I mean, these are the same two plants. You've just got it turned upside down, and it creates a completely new object for you to use. So it almost looks like a spirea or something like that. Yeah, exactly. And then what I think is really impressive too is you've got the scaviola here. That creates a whole new element as well. Yeah, I love that trick now. I use that a lot. Whenever I need to create some kind of green, but I don't have space. Yeah, exactly. So these are just little things you can do to provide variety and realism. I mean, I think Silverette in some episode talked about how everything's better with more shrubbery and greenery and stuff, and it's true. It adds a ton of realism. But if you start thinking of it in these sort of terms, it'll just take it to an entirely another level for yourself. Definitely. All right, and we're into the final step. So picking a plant palette. This has to do with what you're trying to build. If you are going for like a tropical palette, these are all the things that work together. You've got your palms, you've got your banana, you've got even that swamp tree works really well in tropical environments. You've got more color, so your flowers, even though they're the same, you're picking different colors. So you've got your hot magentas, you've got your hot oranges, and hot reds and stuff like that. Yeah, I think that's what's this station is really interesting to me is the color, because you've got some of the same objects in both beds, but just by changing the color, it completely changes the feel of the biome that you're in. Yeah. Like this is the same as this, correct? Yep. Yeah. Yeah, so, and explain your process in terms of, I mean, I'm sure some of it is just your own knowledge, but do you, something I've referenced in the tutorial is getting reference material for almost anything that you're doing. Is that something that you still do? I mean, again, I know you have a lot of knowledge when it comes to this stuff, but
in terms of picking and choosing and, you know, trying to find your biome? How do you go about that?
So some of it is made up from stuff I've learned in the past, but a lot of it is just Google Street View and going into parks and seeing exactly like how they've layered stuff together and the kind of park that you want to put together.
Yeah, I've got to say, that's something that I've started using more since you started talking about it, and it definitely, not only for this kind of thing, but for scale as well, is
scale
incredibly
especially
valuable. Yeah, absolutely. So those are the general aspects of creating Neature, and then we've got sort of a little area here for you to play around and try to create your own.
So I've given you a very big circular planner, so you can kind of work with full 360 space, and then you've also got something that you might see a little bit more in your parks, where you've just got like an edge planter.
Yeah, so like this ridge in here. That kind of thing. Yeah. So again, for time's sake, we're not going to go through and recreate this because landscaping can get a little bit time consuming, but
it takes a few hours sometimes.
Yeah. It's totally worth it though. If you devote the time to it. And, this whole tutorial here, I would encourage you, if this is something that you want to get into and want to get into this kind of detail, just take it step by step and try to recreate some of the stuff that Mike's already done here, and your parks will absolutely be better for it. And the reason that I asked Mike to come on again is just he's incredibly knowledgeable about this stuff. In fact, if you haven't already seen it, he has a video in the BroBasics series where he talks about Neature as well. And I know you've got future plans to talk about nature, and then what was the third element?
So we've got nature, landscape, and glamscape.
Okay, so 4 different aspects. If you didn't know, there's 4 aspects of landscaping in your parks. There is.
And all of this is foundational. So this goes into everything. This goes into landscape. It goes into the highest end. It goes into the lowest end. These are all the same basic things. Yeah,
so be on the lookout for those. I'll toss a link in the description to the Neature episode of BroBasics if you haven't already seen that. And then if you're perusing YouTube looking for tutorials and you aren't aware of the Bro Coaster series, absolutely subscribe there as well, and be on the lookout for more of those types of videos from Mike and John. So that is it for Neature. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. This tutorial didn't feel complete without some topic here, and I just didn't feel like I had the expertise to take it on myself. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, you're very welcome. If I'm biased because I love this stuff, but if you can get a real good handle on this, your parks are going to be so much better. Yeah, absolutely. And I think for us, and I think I can speak for a lot of the sort of realistic park builders out there. The more that people can, if that's something you want to do, not some people want the fantasy type builds and things like that, but if going for realism in your park is something you appreciate and want to, then I think this tutorial is going to help you out a ton in your process. And I think when I first picked up the game, I was frustrated because I didn't feel like I could do a lot of the stuff that I was seeing other people do, and I think once you go through a tutorial like this, you'll realize it's not all that difficult. And I think the other thing I would add that you would agree with is something like this is there's no, there's certain things you want to stay within, but there's a ton of flexibility for your own creativity here. It's kind of like cooking. You don't have to do exactly what the recipe is telling you to do. Right.
You can do certain elements that, you might prefer over others.
Exactly. Yeah.
So perfect. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate you coming on. And in the next episode, I'll be discussing just general, aspects of design, general elements of design. Size and scale being an important one. Also, something that Disney uses frequently in their parks called forced perspective. I know other parks use it as well. We'll discuss color and lighting as in addition to those things. So.
Very cool. You're an expert on that.
On lighting, I don't know about that, but the building stuff in general, I feel pretty good in the game. So Yeah, thank you guys all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the 8th episode.